from MTN, the Montana Television Network. This is Face the State.
Good morning and welcome to Face the State. I'm Mike Dennison, MTN's chief political reporter. Today I'm hosting the final segment in our series of debates between candidates running for statewide office. Today's debate is between the two candidates vying for an open seat on the 7-member Supreme Court. Two of the court's current justices are running unopposed to retain their seats. But the candidates here today are competing in the only contested race for a seat on the state Supreme Court. They are Kristen, Juras, an attorney and former law professor from Great Falls, and Dirk, a state district judge, who is also from Great Falls. The winner gets an 8-year term. Candidates for the Supreme Court in Montana are nonpartisan, meaning they do not run as a member of any political party. Our format this morning, I'll be directing questions to each candidate. They'll have 30 seconds to answer. Their opponent will then have 30 seconds for rebuttal, and the candidate initially asked the question will have 30 seconds for any rebuttal they'd like to make. Each candidate also will have a 1-minute closing statement. I'd like to welcome our candidates, and let's get to the questions. First question goes to Mr. Sandefur. Mr. Sandefur, first, tell us why you're running for the Supreme Court and why you're the best choice for this seat on the court.
Thank you, Mike. I'm running for the Supreme Court to help maintain the integrity of the Montana Supreme Court in the face of the increasing politicization of the court by outside forces who are largely policy and agenda driven. I think I'm clearly the most qualified candidate to serve on the court as a result of the 14 years of experience that I have of deciding cases in one of Montana's most busiest judicial district. These are the cases that come to the Montana Supreme Court. I've been deciding them fairly and impartially for 14 years.
Thank you. Ms. Juras.
I'm running for the Montana Supreme Court because I would bring a perspective that's currently not represented on the court. For 34 years, I've been representing farmers, ranchers, small business owners, nonprofits, individuals in the wide variety of legal issues that they face. Everything from contract disputes, property, income tax issues, probates, water rights, and that perspective isn't on the court. The law is as specialized as medicine, and a diverse court with a spectrum of experience is a better court.
Thank you. Mr. Sandefur, in response.
Well, I have that full spectrum of experience because those types of cases that come into Montana's court system, I've been deciding fairly, impartially, and highly competently for the last 14 years. And the Montana Supreme Court is not a team of specialists. It never has been, it never will be. It's a team of people with broad-based experience, and frankly, that's what you say when you don't have the broad-based experience that I have.
Ms. Juras, I'd like you to explain to voters why this race is important and how its outcome may affect the tenor or the nature of the court.
The Montana Supreme Court is the place where many of the critical issues, legal issues, are resolved. The race is critical. It's important to have a court that fairly, consistently, impartially applies the law without a political agenda, without regard to personal beliefs of the justices, so that the citizens know how to manage their affairs in accordance with the rule of law.
Thank you. Mr. Sandefur, your response.
Well, we need to keep the court free of political agendas, social agendas, personal agendas, and that's precisely why I'm running. Our court is again under attack from the outside of our state and from extremists on the inside who want to influence our court to obtain particular results that will fit them to the detriment of all Montanans. We just need to have fair and impartial people who have a proven record of being fair and impartial. I'm the only person in that category in this race.
Ms. Juras, anything to say to that?
Yes, I am also fair and impartial, and I have taught at the law school for 16 years, and each and every one of my students will say that in teaching them the law, I have never suggested that there should be a results-oriented outcome, that the law is to be applied fairly and consistently. There are special interests, and Mr. Sandefur is supported by a very powerful special interest group, and that is the Montana Trial Attorneys.
Thank you. And this question goes to Mr. Sandefur. Now, you've suggested in the campaign and today that Ms. Juras has an extreme agenda that she'll bring to the court. What makes you say that? What type of agenda are we talking about?
Well, she has a very documented public record of being a religious activist, advocating on a wide variety of socially divisive issues. She's taken very public anti-stream access positions and other special interest positions. Of course, she did this before she wanted to run for the court, and now she's trying to walk away from those positions, but they're a matter of public record.
Ms. Juras, I'm sure you'd like to respond.
I would. I absolutely have no political agenda. It is true that I have opinions in my personal life, but an opinion is not a bias. I am a woman of faith. I am not a religious activist. And it is sad to suggest that people of faith are somehow not fit to serve in an elective office, including serving as a judge. The anti-stream access line is a cry of wolf. The stream access laws in Montana are fully settled, and I'll apply those laws.
Thank you. Mr. Sandefur.
Well, it's ridiculous and offensive to suggest that I'm trying to say that people of faith shouldn't serve on the court. There are people of faith on the court. I'm a person of faith. There will always be people of faith. That's a good thing. That's not the issue. The issue is taking very public positions on policy, political, and social issues that you cannot divorce yourself from and you bring to the court. And frankly, the stream access issue is an issue where you've very publicly stated your opinions, and it's clear that if you're on the court, you'll try to chip away at that at every chance you get.
Thank you. Ms. Juras, now in your opening and during the campaign, you've said the court, that you've been in the trenches and the court needs someone who's been in the trenches representing farmers and ranchers and small business people. Well, why? You know, this isn't a representative body. You know, this is a court of law.
It is not a representative body, but a wide spectrum of cases come before the court. Currently, a majority of the court comes from a government background, and that's a valid background, and we need that background on the court. We have a former district court judge on the court. We have a former administrative law judge on the court. Again, very important perspectives, but there is nobody on the court that brings the private sector background that I would bring to the court.
Mr. Sandefur, you certainly have some thoughts on this.
Again, it's misdirection. I've been deciding the private sector cases, the government sector cases, and every other type of case in our system. I have a tried and proven record. I'm well respected across the legal community in Montana, being a highly competent judge and ultimately impartial and independent. And the idea that somehow that Professor Jurist has some particular expertise that she brings to the court is just not accurate.
Ms. Juras.
There is a difference between sitting as a presiding judge over a variety of matters and actually being in the trenches, preparing the arguments, advocating for the clients, which requires much more depth. So it's this difference between someone building a building and having those skills and a government official inspecting the building. So it is important, for example, to have someone who's actually filed a water rights claim, defended a water rights claim, perfected water rights claim, as water rights come before the court.
Thank you. Mr. Sandefur, Ms. Juras mentioned earlier your support from the plaintiff's bar, commonly known as the trial lawyers, which is true, and organized labor as well is a big supporter of yours. What does that say about your candidacy?
Well, first of all, back to this last question, the differences between somebody who's in the courtroom handling these cases and somebody who's been in the classroom for the last 16 years reading about them and talking about them. As to these supporters that I have supporters from across the wide spectrum of people in Montana, working people, legal professionals, Republicans, Democrats. It's a widely diverse spectrum of support that I have.
Ms. Juras.
The Montana trial attorneys have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in several of the last judicial campaigns advocating that their client, aligned with their interests, will be elected. In this particular election, they're stating that they support Mr. Sandefur because of his judicial experience. But in the 2010 and 2012 elections, they did not support the judicial candidate. I think it's truly concerning that very wealthy attorneys spend $50,000 in support of a judicial candidate and then proceed to appear before those candidates.
Mr. Sandefur, your response.
Attorneys can contribute no more than $990 per person to me directly. What they do in the exercise of their First Amendment rights, independent of that, is up to them. It's funny that the trial lawyers are being characterized as special interests. These people are Main Street businesses, they're our neighbors, they're our friends. They represent Montanans in times of need in the courtroom. They are not on equivalency to the out-of-state corporations who are dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars into Montana to smear my name. They're not supporting my opponent because of her experience, but because of the agenda that she brings to the court.
Thank you. This question goes to Ms. Juras. As we talked about before, this is a nonpartisan race, but you're getting a lot of support from Republicans and business groups. What does that say about your candidacy?
I think that I am supported by business groups. I've been endorsed by the Montana Chamber of Commerce, the Montana Contractors, the Montana Bankers, and they are concerned about bringing to the court a justice with extensive background in the areas that they practiced. And by the way, although I have been teaching for 16 years, I've also been in the classroom during that time. So my support comes from people who genuinely believe that there is a perspective missing from the court that I would bring.
Mr. Sandefur.
Well, again, she's back to perspectives, and what that is that's code for saying that I'm going to see the world the way particular people see the world, or reach results that will be favorable to these types of people. Perspectives have no place on our court. Our court is about deciding cases based on the facts and the law of particular cases and letting them chips fall where they may under our state and federal constitutions.
Ms. Juras, would you like to respond to that in any way?
Yes, and going back, this is a nonpartisan race, and the Democratic Montana Party just sent out mailers in support of Mr. Sandefur. Several Democratic legislators and elected officials, including the Secretary of State, Linda McCullough, who is supposed to be impartial in administering these elections, have hosted many fundraisers for him. So unfortunately, there is a strong Democratic support at becoming involved in this race and bringing partisanship into the race.
Mr. Sandefur, you cite your experience as a district judge as being relevant experience, and I'm wondering, why is that any more relevant than other experience with the law, a practicing attorney or someone who's worked as Ms. Juras has?
Well, it's very simple, Mike, because the cases that come to the Montana Supreme Court are litigated cases. They don't come from the practitioner's office or the practitioner's desk. They're cases that have been litigated for the most part in district court with very few exceptions. Those are the cases that I've been deciding, and notwithstanding that Professor Jurist will try to tell you that she has some particular courtroom expertise, the public record just is that she does not. And so she's severely lacking in the most relevant experience that there is, and that is working in the courtroom where these cases come from.
Ms. Juras, your response.
Of course it's relevant experience to have represented, for example, farmers and ranchers. Agriculture is our #1 industry, to represent Main Street businesses. There are 5 justices on the court who currently have no prior judicial experience. Justices McGrath, Baker, Rice, Cotter, and Wheat. It is absolutely essential to bring to the court a broad spectrum of experience. That results in better decisions, especially in the more complicated areas of law, such as partnership dissolutions.
Mr. Sandefur, anything else to say?
It's laughable that she says that. She hasn't handled those cases in court. I've handled the partnership dissolutions. I've handled the complex civil litigation cases. Of course, she doesn't tell you she has 0 experience with criminal cases, child abuse and neglect cases, constitutional law cases that are litigated. There's clearly, without question, one person who's qualified. If the politics weren't involved in this race, and this was straight up on the job application, the job requirements, she wouldn't even get an interview for the job.
Speaking of politics, Ms. Juras, an out-of-state group, the Republican State Leadership Council, which is funded mostly by national corporations, is backing you in attacking Mr. Sandefur Your opponents have suggested that this group is trying to buy the race on your behalf. Is that an accurate portrayal in your mind?
Absolutely not. This group is not trying to buy the race. And it's not the only group. As I pointed out, there's a similar amount of expenditures that are coming from the Montana trial attorneys in supporting Mr. Sandefur. What the groups supporting me and opposing Mr. Sandefur are concerned about, the Montana Supreme Court has been consistently ranked at the bottom tier of states by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for its business legal climate. That has a serious consequence to Montana's economy. These are business groups who want to get someone with a background in business, Main Street businesses, farmers and ranchers on the court.
Thank you. Mr. Sandefur.
That's just demonstrably false. Professor Juras knows it's false. She was scolded earlier this week at a forum at the law school by the Chief Justice, who pointed out accurately that those special interest group statistics were 20 plus years old and are not in accord with the current data that's out there. Secondly, these out-of-state corporations who are dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars into Montana very clearly want to buy our court. They're not paying for her experience. She doesn't have any.
Ms. Juras, your response to that?
Well, first of all, the data that I'm relying on is not 20 years old. It's a study from 1990 to 2000, another study from 2000 to 2010 that was published in 2012. And it is absolutely false that I do not have courtroom experience. In my 34-year career, I have been in the courtroom hundreds of times. I have appeared before Dirk Sandefur and have presented him with an order that he signed in a very complicated case arising out of an automobile accident that involved 5 different proceedings, including criminal proceedings.
Thank you. Mr. Sandefur, I'd like to shift gears a little bit here and ask about the operations of the court and your views of that. Right now, the current court rarely has oral arguments in open court on the cases before it. Is that acceptable in your view? Is that anything that should be changed?
Well, first of all, I cannot let this pass without response. Hundreds of times over 34 years, even if that was true, comes down to a relatively small number on par with the number of cases that I handle on a busy day or a week in district court. As to oral arguments, we routinely have oral arguments in district court. I love oral arguments. They allowed me to test my logic and me to challenge the lawyers. I think oral arguments are a good thing, and I'm certainly a fan and supporter of more of them.
What do you think about the oral arguments before the court?
I believe that there should be more oral arguments before the court. Not every case merits an oral argument, but certainly, in my opinion, more than currently are. I do believe that the current administration of the court and Chief Justice McGrath has done a good job expediting cases through the court, working through the backlog, and that comes at the expense of oral arguments at non-publishable or non-citable opinions. But the court should revisit that and see if it's time to have more oral arguments to move away from the non-citable opinions.
Anything else to say on the subject?
I have nothing further to say about that. I think that covers it.
Okay. Ms. Jurist, you mentioned this prior in the debate. You know, some critics of the Montana Supreme Court say it is inconsistent and that its unpredictability makes Montana a difficult place to do business. You subscribe to that view, is that correct? And tell us why.
I do subscribe to that view. Between 1990 and 2000, Jeff Renz, faculty advisor for the ACLU, so on the left side of the spectrum, he created a report that they reversed themselves 109 times in 10 years. Rob Nadelson, former Republican governor, on the other side of the spectrum in 2012, did a study between 2000 and 2010 where again the court reversed itself 73 times. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed in a matter of months 2 of the Montana Supreme Court decisions. That is the basis for the accurate observation that the court is inconsistent.
What do you think about that charge about the court, Mr.
Again,
Sandefur?
she's just wrong, and she's continuing to put out inaccurate information as she was challenged on just last week. Just by her own statements here today, she's talking about studies from 1990 to 2000. The most recent up-to-date information is the information that was published recently in the Billings Gazette by an independent news organization that reported on the user study from lawyers and litigants and judges and observers in our court system who give the Montana Supreme Court very high marks for following the law and being consistent and stable.
Thank you. Ms. Juras.
Well, as a law professor and a practitioner, I can identify several areas where there are inconsistent opinions, where the Montana Supreme Court, instead of applying the statute as written, applies its own standards in derogation of the statute. I firmly believe that the court needs to apply the law as written and not legislate from the bench.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sandefur, one of the campaign ads attacking you mentions your sentencing order in a child pornography case where the defendant got a suspended sentence. A part of that order says no evidence was presented that possessors of child pornography pose a risk of physical victimization. Are those your words? What happened with that case?
Well, I can't answer that case in 30 seconds. Those are very complex cases. The bottom line is those ads are patently false, demonstrably false. These people were not pornographers. They weren't involved in the production or distribution of pornography. They were people who were in possession of some pornography unlawfully, and the state came in and represented probationary plea agreements. I sentenced them in accordance with those plea agreements and gave them probation in accordance with the independent findings that they were not risks to the community. Those are the rest of the facts. They're out there. They don't want them out there.
Ms. Juras, do you have anything to say about this ad or this case?
I do. First of all, in the statute that was in play in the child pornography, it's a statute entitled Sexual Abuse of Children, and it doesn't distinguish in this particular crime from those in possession of child pornography and those who produce or finance child pornography. There is a difference in the sentencing. And it is true, based upon articles from the Great Falls Tribune, that Mr. Sandefur ordered sentences that were less than those recommended, and in 2 of those, he granted a 6-year deferred imposition, which means that at the end of 6 years, it'll be off of their records.
Mr. Sandefur, you'd like to respond?
Again, it's laughable to have Professor Jurist talking to me about criminal cases. She knows nothing about them. She's never represented a criminal defendant. She's never prosecuted one. She certainly hasn't judged one. She's so out of her element here in her depth, it's laughable. It's offensive. The fact is those people still have to register as sex offenders for the rest of their lives. I sentence those people in accordance with the law. The prosecutors and other individuals who understand the criminal justice system have made public statements that support what I'm saying.
Thank you. Ms. Juras, now you said that you're personally opposed to same-sex marriage. Should that stance give any voter pause in selecting you to be a justice who could rule on cases related to same-sex marriage? Absolutely
not. Justices are constantly asked to rule on cases, apply laws that justice may not have supported if that justice were a legislator. I absolutely understand that the rule of the law after the rule of the land after the 2015 U.S. Supreme Court decision is that there is a right to same-sex marriage. But we can't deny that what we will be seeing, as has been seen in other states, rulings that require a balancing between that right and the equally important right of religious freedom.
Thank you. Mr. Sandefur, your thoughts on this?
Again, she's just not being honest about what she's been saying to people around the state on this issue. She gives lip service to the fact that the same-sex marriages are recognized under federal law, but then she talks about to people with a wink and a nod that they need to be aware of who's on the court and what their values or their views are. And what she's saying to these people with a wink and a nod is that there are other areas where I think that I can have a difference, contrary to chip away at this same-sex marriage right. And she shouldn't be taking that type of a position as a judicial candidate.
And what do you think about that, Ms. Juras?
Well, I think if anyone's engaged in discrimination, it's Mr. Sandefur, who referred to people who hold the belief that a marriage is between a man and a woman as haters and bigots, and has promised the LGBT community in those cases where there is a conflict between religious freedom and their rights that they will always prevail in his courtroom.
Mr. Sandefur, Montana has a unique and some would say a very liberal state constitution when it comes to individual rights. I'm wondering what would you point to as some of the most significant rights under Montana's constitution, and what's the job of a justice in making sure those rights are enforced.
Well, again, Mike, I can't let that last lie pass without response. What she's referring to is demonstrably false. The statements I made are recorded. She knows it. She has it. She's lying to you. Check the public record on this. The best, or not the best, but of the most significant special rights that we have in Montana is our beloved right to individual privacy. We have others. I think it's obviously the role of the court, whether it's privacy rights or other fundamental individual rights, it's the role of the court to protect those rights under the law in accordance with our Constitution.
Ms. Juras, your response.
The Montana Constitution is unique in that it does create and articulate many rights that aren't written in the U.S. Constitution, including the right to privacy, including a right to participate in public government, the religious freedoms. We have a stronger right to own and bear arms than is set forth in the U.S. Constitution. So we protect individual rights.
Anything else, Mr. Sandefur?
I think that covers it.
Okay. We're now going to go to our closing statements. We'll start out with Ms. Juras.
I am the right candidate for this seat in this election. The Montana Supreme Court would benefit from a private sector attorney with 34 years experience representing small business owners, farmers, ranchers, nonprofits. A diverse court representing a broad spectrum of experience is a better court. These issues are important. 60% of the court's direct appeals involve these sorts of issues. For example, we're going to see more litigation on water rights. It's important to have on the court an attorney who has not only irrigated a hayfield, but has filed and defended and participated in water rights litigation. My candidate doesn't have that experience, nor do the other justices. There are complicated areas of law that affect small business owners, farmers, and ranchers, and when you have the justices deliberating over decisions, it would be absolutely beneficial to bring that experience to the table.
Thank you, Mr. Sandefur. Your closing statement.
It boils down to this. There's just no substitute for relevant experience. I have it, she doesn't. That's why you're hearing about this snake oil, about her special diversity or her special experience. She doesn't have it. It's not true. Montanans, you're intelligent. Check it out. Talk to lawyers, talk to judges. She's not a recognized water law expert. Water law cases represent a very small fraction of the cases our court handles. Furthermore, the Montana Supreme Court is no place for my opponent's documented religious activist agenda on divisive social issues, anti-stream access positions, and other special interest positions. And finally, if you don't know me, you don't know her. I'm trusted and supported by the people that you trust over the last 20 years to handle our business on the court. I'm endorsed and supported by every single one of Montana's retired Supreme Court justices. They know the job. They know what's at issue here. They know I'm the right person for the job. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
I'd like to thank both of our candidates for a very good debate from both sides. I'm Mike Dennison, MTN's Chief Political Reporter. I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning. And next week on Face the State, we'll be talking about opioid addiction in Montana and its effect on the court and criminal justice system. I hope you join us then. Thank you for joining us this morning.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.